I always get asked, what is the California greens, the LGMA, if you will, and 15 minutes is sort of that 45,000 foot elevation. It's going to be quick and fast, but we're a farm-based, industry-funded food safety program. You've heard all the reasons why it came to be. 10 years, 11 years later, we're still sort of fighting some of those demons that have been with us the whole time. Mandatory audits, Steve, a lot of my info has been covered somewhat this morning, but mandatory audits are conducted by CDFAs. We average about 450 to 500 audits a year. Every handler's audited multiple times. Every grower's audited at least one time, so it's very comprehensive. It's an ongoing process of auditors out in the field keeping track of things. We do have a training arm, LGMA Tech. We have a series of specifically focused food safety training programs for the industry. Basic things, food safety and hygiene, risk assessments, environmental assessments, the whole thing. Arizona manages a sister program in Arizona, so we work hand in hand. And that was real apparent down in El Centro yesterday with, there's a nice crossover between the two programs. So, we're at that point now, I think, where we're starting to work really well together. So, well, I've heard a lot this morning in terms of regulations and the impact of those regulations, but some of the information I heard this morning today was, way over my head in some cases. But I think it really points out the fact that we're all in the business of putting safe food, protecting public health. You'll hear that a lot today. But in addition to that, the water quality concerns were some other enlightening things for sure. And I'll get in more detail on water. We just went through a series of changes in our metrics that have really ratcheted up the whole water testing and acceptance criteria. So that's expanded in sampling for sure. There's a lot of things that kind of came about because of FSMA that as we went through and we aligned our regulations with FSMA, we had to make some changes, but that sort of drove the idea that some areas that we needed to bolster up. One of those was training. So there's a lot more required under the LGMA in terms of what our employees, I guess, have to be trained to. So, I think what we're getting at here is we're sort of on different sides of the fence, but we have a lot of crossover in a lot of different ways, and that kind of makes it fun, I think. So anyway, the point, all industry, we're all facing challenges. They're not necessarily the same, but at the end of the day, they're things that have to be done, and the more we work together collectively. And I just wanted to add to that, clearly on Tuesday, the whole idea of communication was just rock solid in terms of got to do better at it. We got to do better at it. And one of the things I wanted to mention on that was just an idea. It might come up in the discussion later this morning, but the idea that you get small groups, like a steering committee, for example, is a cross-section of the growing community and the cattleman industry. And work through those problems together. This is a good forum for that, but it's big, it's kind of cumbersome, so there was a lot of interest in moving in that direction. So, you've heard this morning about some of the things we've done in the last year. Kind of the thing that headed that out first was buffer zones. And this goes back, we added another layer of buffers depending upon the size of the operation. So 1,000 head up to 79,999 requires now a 1,200 foot buffer. Anything beyond that requires a 1 mile buffer from the operation. That's all based upon some research done in the Midwest, and it showed pathogens could move up to 600 feet. Unfortunately, the study stopped there. And so it's sort of this uncertainty beyond that. Do they move that farther? So we know they go out that far. So in lieu of these outbreaks, it became apparent we had to do something. And so with our 400 foot previous barrier, just to be on the safe side, we tripled that to 1,200 feet. Now, we were very concerned about the large feedlots. And so there's debate about 80,000 and larger. Is that a good number? That's being worked on right now. But there were real concerns about those size of feedlots in conjunction or in close proximity to leafy greens. There's a safety and public health risk. I think everybody agreed to that. And that was all hashed out in meetings with FDA and the industry as a whole. So that's where we stand right now. Arizona is still at at 1,200 feet. Not sure what they're going to do. Their season doesn't start till next fall. So a little bit about our just industry food safety and audits in general. As I said, LGMA's audits are mandatory. They're performed multiple times through the year. Now we have different layers of audits. We have multiple third-party audit companies that are out there doing all kinds of audits for different requirements. A lot of you are familiar, you've heard of Primus GFS. They do GFSI audit certification. But there's other auditing companies that do that audit and do others as well, SQF, Global Gap. There's a real expansion of this whole area in terms of auditing for food safety. And it came up this morning, I found it timely, if you will, is this whole idea about the buyers and what they want. And they are certainly expanding the amount of auditing they're doing. And they're doing it to their requirements. And I think to the more like a disservice to the industry is they come in and they have a set of standards. They don't really line up with anybody else's. It's their standards. And so you start getting this raising the bar. If it's 1,200 feet, why not 1,500 feet? And so at the end of the day, even though we're trying to establish a regulatory environment, the bar is constantly being raised. And if you're trying to, you want to sell your product, you got to meet those demands. So generally, at least it's been my experience, growers migrate up to the highest level, and then so they cover all of those requirements. And so I think it was mentioned earlier that just creates a lot of confusion. So if we can get some standardization and consistency between these two commodities, our groups, our industries, I think we're going to be a lot better off. But that's going to be a work in progress. I think Sharon Lanini is going to be spearheading that charge. So it's that variation again that makes it very challenging. But just to get back to the livestock side, clearly you have a raft of really stringent regulations. I don't know if there's overlap and crossover, but it seems to me that you're certainly extremely regulated in a raft of things. So we've got to work together. So ag water, that's the hot topic of the day. We just went through a significant change in our water standards. Clearly these last outbreaks focused in on water as the potential source of those events. A lot of work went into the final version of these regulations, crafting these regulations. But the key is you can use any kind of water up till 21 days for a scheduled harvest. Within those 21 days, you can only use what we call type A water, which is water that's never been exposed to the environment. Or you can take type B water, which is water that's in an open source exposed to the environment, and you can treat it and bring it up to A water quality. The point is, it's got to be treated if you're going to use any type B water, and that's a big change. And for those familiar with the desert, that is all open water, and so they're going to be looking at a significant amount of treating. So a couple of things within that category: type A, type B. Focus on managing the systems. One thing we're really trying to emphasize to the industry or the growing community is you really got to know your system, how it works. You got to manage it in much more detail than you probably have in the past. And we're trying to establish the idea that if something's broken, you got to go in and find it and you got to fix it. You know, one of the sort of the stalwart or the foundation of these new standards is there's ways you can correct the problem by testing just to see where you're at. But it's going to be pushed very hard on the industry that you have to find the solutions to problems. You can't keep continually encountering water quality standards that don't meet the bill. So find and fix is becoming the new operative term, and being more aware of your system and manage it accordingly. Certainly, these are much more stringent standards. So these last few slides are just some of the things that we do in addition to, I think maybe outside of what some of the things you do. And that's been the beauty of these combined meetings, I think, is we get an appreciation for what you do, and you get an appreciation for what we have to do to satisfy our buying community. So the basic idea behind food safety assessments is identifying where there's higher risks of contamination. So, we have a series of assessments that go on throughout the season. And the idea is if you have a problem you identify it, you develop mitigation steps to address and solve those problems. So those 3 assessments are, and they're pretty rigorous. You have to do a preseason assessment before you plant any crop in the ground, and that's the idea that you look for any inconsistencies, things that might have cropped up through over time. You test your water system, you do a environmental assessment, animal activity popped up, anything that's changed from the prior year, so that sort of starts the foundation. Then with the LGMA, you have to do what we call a pre-harvest assessment, and that's where generally that's probably the handler or grower will go out and assess this field that's going to be harvested within 7 days. And it gives an opportunity to see if there is some issues that have popped up. You can handle them and get them under control before they happen, and that's not uncommon. We see that quite often. And then on the daily harvest, that's every day the harvest crew's in the field. Their crew supervisor does a full assessment of the operation. They walk the entire field. They look for any evidence of animal intrusion, anything that's out of the ordinary. They evaluate the health and safety of their employees. Very, very rigorous. They do log inspections on the porta potties. Anything that they have to do that coincides with operations that day, they have to check it out. They got knife dip buckets. I mean, there's a whole list of things. So, it's sort of a broad assessment. It narrows down 7 to 1, and then on that day of harvest, very comprehensive. And we really feel that's made a big difference in not only promoting better safety or better food sanitation hygiene with workers, but it instills, and I think it came up this morning, this idea of culture of food safety. You instill in people, these are things we do every day without fail, and that's the way you get there. So we really feel like we've made some real strides there. And the whole idea is you ID problems early, and you fix them with corrective actions. You don't let things go. Soil amendments is an area where we're certainly concerned. It's because it's regulated. We have to test and sample and test compost. The requirements were covered here today. I would note that for heat-treated products, animal chicken pellets primarily, also have to be now tested for listeria. So those are all non-detect pathogens. You can't have any other than fecal coliforms. So that's a little bit step above what's sort of standard out there in the world. Every lot that goes to a grower has to have a COA, certificate of analysis, that can be tied back to that lot. It has the test results, has to be made available if the auditor asks for it. They generally they will, for those who are doing composting. So, and just this is an area that continues to be reviewed and somewhat of concern. So we're going to, in sort of the spirit of amping up or ramping up our food safety efforts with the leafy greens, we're going to put a bigger emphasis with the auditors looking more closely at that whole process and that really reacts to some of the subtle suggestions we've gotten from FDA in that particular area. So, in conclusion, our handlers have a rigorous set of standards. Our growers who work underneath it's a handler grower relationship, but they do the heavy lifting, and they. Not unlike your folks, your industry, a lot of things that have to be met and followed up on. We verify compliance, follow up when there's violations and make sure it's been done. We call that corrective actions. It came up a little bit earlier, I think, that we do have the ability, the metrics, the way it's structured and function is we can very quickly respond to things that appear to be out of the ordinary. Even though these water standards took quite a while, they really turned around and given the disagreements initially, we got those into place pretty fast. It was the same thing with the buffers on feedlots. So that really gives us a heads up. We see things we can start working on very quickly. We control that process through Western growers, and so we're nimble, as the way I always like to look at it. Our handlers may be invited, which goes through their growers up to 6 times per year. So, it's a very comprehensive audit inspection program. And as always, we continue to look for better ways to improve the program. I know we're going to take questions later, so thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.